Thank you for coming. This is the first session of Founder University. Founder University is a new program that has been funded through a grant from the Economic Development Administration. And our vision for it was that it would be an ongoing education for entrepreneurs, that we can bring in special speakers and deal with topics in a little bit more depth. So we're looking for subject matter experts to be speaking to you. And since our executive director, Jeff Sailing, has been through the startup grind several times, he is an expert and able to speak about the entrepreneurial journey. So in upcoming months, we have one topic per month. It will go through December, and then we will start again in January and repeat with different speakers. So Jeff Sailing is the executive director. His story is going to be told to you now, so I don't need to do any more elaboration. Come on, Jeff.
Thanks, Maggie. So welcome, and I'm excited to lead off our Founder University. You're living in a world filled with opportunities. Choosing among them and deciding how to spend your life and your time is probably the most important decision that you're going to make. For me, the goal is to live a life that matters, to do some good in the world, and to leave some footprints, good ones. Entrepreneurship isn't just about starting companies. It's an approach to life. It's about making good things happen that haven't been done before, starting things from scratch to create value that didn't exist before, innovating, then implementing to make something happens that creates a tangible result and that has real value. So I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and I'm looking forward to working with everybody here. And they share a set of common characteristics. They're creative because they're dissatisfied with the ordinary. The most creative people in the world are people who believe they're creative. When there's a problem to solve, they come up with an idea, and if they're usually not satisfied with that first idea, and because they believe they can do better. So they abandon the original idea, iterate, and create something better. We've called that pivoting. They're courageous because doing something new and understanding that it doesn't always work out, is risky. And you may think you're risk averse, but the secret is that naivete, it works just as well. When you don't understand all the things that can go wrong, you look courageous. Entrepreneurs are visionaries. In quiet moments, they're thinking about the future and what their role in it is, and they're imagining what they can do to create value in that future. Entrepreneurs are special people because most people look at the world and they say, why? Why is it that way? Entrepreneurs dream about a world that might be and ask, well, why not? But they're not just dreamers, they're doers. They have a sense of urgency about them and what they're doing because it doesn't have value as a dream, but it does when you take action. Entrepreneurs are stubborn, they're determined. When things don't always work out, but failure does not come from defeat. It only happens when you stop trying. So if you don't give up, you'll never fail. Entrepreneurs are leaders, and there's a simple criterion that I have for a leader. True leaders give credit and take blame. There's really no limit to what you can achieve as long as you don't care who gets the credit. People do yearn for truth tellers and leaders, and you can be a role model and you can be a leader as well. The poet Robert Frost wrote about this in one of his most famous poems. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler long I stood, and looked down the road as far as I could, to where it bent into the undergrowth. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that's made all the difference. So the meaning for that for me is simple. It's about choices. Life is about choices. It's also about dreams and destiny, and a dream can lift you up, and it can inspire. And if you don't have a dream, how can you make the dream come true? There's no guarantees that dreams will come true or destiny will be realized. For most, it never happens. It requires decisions, daring, doing, discipline, determination. And a dream without courage and commitment remains just a dream. So to fulfill your destiny, you must feel these forces and seize the moment and sense why you're here. And then live that, live according to that. Don't give up. Life is about never giving up. It's about making a positive difference in the world, leaving footprints, living life as an entrepreneur. If you do live your life as an entrepreneur, in whatever endeavors that you undertake and wherever your talents lead, there's going to be two benefits. First, you will touch in a positive way the lives of others. And outside of your family, I think you'll experience the greatest satisfaction a human can. And that's the satisfaction of looking at the world and seeing something good in it that didn't exist before you took this dream and tried to make it real. So I'm pretty inspired about entrepreneurs and being an entrepreneur, and just proud to be on this journey along with all of you. I've been part of 7 startups, 3 that went to an IPO and a 4th that was acquired. But my proudest professional achievement has been the creation of this, StartUpNV, and all the work that we in this organization all do, teaching entrepreneurship like today, helping founders, teaching investors, creating funds. And even though these are probably what we'll think of as the wilderness years of getting started, I'm convinced that what we're working on here will achieve the intended purposes in our community and really help us to grow and achieve together. So again, welcome. So today I'm talking about the introduction to the entrepreneurial journey. And aside from that sort of soliloquy introduction, I'm going to use myself as an example of what my journey was, and hopefully it'll inspire a little bit, probably scare you a little bit, and hopefully it'll make sense along the way. So there's one slide in my presentation today. That's it. I'm going to just talk through what my journey's been, and so that you get a sense for it. And I don't think my journey is unusual, and I'll just use it as an example. So I started my entrepreneurial journey when I was in college. I didn't think I was starting an entrepreneurial journey when I was in college. I was just driving a truck, driving a forklift. I was making money. I was getting paid $10 an hour in 1979 to 1980, 1979 to 1983. And I think $10 an hour, probably equivalent today, is probably like $60 an hour. And it was, 4 or 5 times the minimum wage. Well, maybe not 4 or 5, but 3 or 4 times the minimum wage. And it was great. I ended up being a pretty responsible guy. So they promoted me and put me in charge of stuff. And I kind of stuck around, not because I planned it, but because it just is how it worked out. And then by the time I got to 1992, I thought, why am I here because I want to be here? Or am I here just because it was easy? I just kept taking the money, kept doing the job. And so at that point, I actually did my first startup. It was a company called 1-800-START-CAR-SEARCH in Southern California. We raised about $70 million at that startup, and it was right on the border of when the internet was created. So we did not consult Al Gore for this. We did it on our own. We opened a business as a call center. You could call this number, 1-800-CAR-SEARCH. I have no idea where it leads right now, but at the time, it led to a big call center that you could tell us what kind of car you were searching for. We would look it up in our database of cars, and we would fax or mail you a list of the cars that fit your description. It was quite a novel thing in 1992. There was no internet. It did come along while we were working on car search, and it was an invigorating ride. We raised money from some of the most famous people in Hollywood, studio executives, famous actors. Howard Stern was on our cap table because he read a bunch of advertising for us on his then live radio shows on over the air in New York and in LA. And it got me hooked. I mean, it was a wild ride. There were times when we ran out of money, nobody got paid. There were months that I went along, didn't get paid. And I was married, had a family at that time, a couple of little kids, but we ground it all out. We even made a deal with the liquor store around the corner from us. And people used to get a paycheck, an actual paper paycheck, and they would go and cash it. And a lot of times they'd go to a liquor store or some other place to cash the checks. They didn't charge much, and the owners hoped that people would actually spend a little money in their store by cashing their checks. And we made an agreement with them several times over the course of this time to just hold on to the checks till Monday, because we would then have money in the bank to cover the checks that the employees had cashed at his store. And it was we raised $70 million over the course of 4 years. We did a lot of direct response advertising on the radio and on television. You know, those 1-800 commercials that you see, come and buy now. We followed all of those rules and built a big company. We had as many as, as few as 2 of us and as many as 300 or 400 of us working for the company at any given time, depending on whether we had money or not. And the way that we structured it was, my friend Bernie, whose idea it was for the company, his uncle had some money and they were our first investors. So his uncle wanted to take control. So his uncle became the CEO of the company. And his uncle's friend, Joel, so he had Mark and Joel, the 2 uncles, I'll call them, I think I was 28 and my friend Bernie was 25. And we needed some adult supervision. So the 2 uncles became the CEO and I can't remember what Joel was called, but the bosses. And we started to raise more money to kind of get this thing started. And eventually Mark and Joel just sort of pushed Bernie and I aside and they said, well, we're going to raise all the money. And what we found out later was that Mark and Joel were lying to everybody. And they clearly did not have the lesson that I had with Kathy McMillan, my first love in 7th grade, who I was supposed to meet her somewhere and I cooked up some story and then contradicted myself later and I was caught out. My heart was crushed. And I learned at that point that I do not have the ability to lie. So I better just tell the truth. And so Mark and Joel did not learn that lesson. And they told anybody, anything they could to raise the next round of funding. And eventually the people that had put the money in started asking Bernie and I, what's going on here? And we didn't know the lies that they had told, so we just told them the truth. Some truth, some of it was great, some of it was not great. And eventually the whole thing fell apart. We had raised all this money and we had just gotten to the point where we had kind of figured out the business model, and it was all starting to work. And there were so many big egos on the cap table and everybody was pointing fingers, mostly at Mark and Joel, but sometimes at each other. And the whole thing just fell apart and it crushed us. It crushed our hearts and our souls. And some of the best relationships that I have to this day were the relationships that I made during that time. 2 are serving me right now. Bernie has been a founder, has taken a couple of companies public. And the fellow who now runs the Pasadena Angels was one of our earliest investors, and we still do a lot of work together. And every time I talk to Stender says, Jeff, we were right there. We had figured out the cost per call. We knew what our upsells were. We were there. If we only, it's like, yeah, I know, Stender. I mean, this is 30 plus years later, and it's still the burn is still there. And maybe that's, first love kind of thing, because you're never gonna forget. But I got to tell you, I learned a lot of lessons there. And even though it failed, we had to close the place up. It was quite the experience. Learned a lot about raising money, learned a lot about being direct, learned a lot about just telling the truth, good, bad, indifferent. Be honest with your investors, be honest with the people that are around you. They can help. They want to help. So be straightforward. But after that experience, and not having money and losing all the money that we had put in and not being paid for a bunch of it, like, I needed to get a job. So I went to work for what the safest company I thought I could, Accenture. They were creating practice where they wanted to outsource call centers all around the world. And I thought, well, all right, they're going to pay me. I went to work for the Canadian practice, which meant they paid me in Canadian dollars. And they told me what they were going to pay me. And I thought I had won the lottery. It sounded like 3 shiploads of money. That's ship with a P, not with a T. I guess it works either way. So I went to work for Accenture. We called on the Ford Motor Company to take over their call center operations for their customer service calls. And we built a big call center in Toronto. And they brought me in because I had built this call center in Southern California with hundreds of people there, and it was automotive related. And they thought, wow, this has got to be a good match. And I think it was. We had a good time selling to Ford, built the call center out. But the thing that frustrated me is this is where I learned I'm not a big company guy. I'm a guy that likes, if you're thinking of the entrepreneurial journey as like cutting your way through a forest or a jungle, I like it when there's no path. I like getting the machete out and figuring out my own path. But when there's a path already there and everybody expects you to follow it, or worse, everybody expects you to collaborate on the path, drove me crazy. I just wanted to run we had made a deal with Ford. I just wanted to run the thing. That was not a good vibe at Accenture. So it was probably the two most painful years of my career. Way more painful than being out of money was trying to fit into this 100,000 person organization and have all the smart kids that come out of the big schools that get to join Accenture tell me like, you don't know what you're doing. And when we designed the call center in Toronto, Canada, where it's cold. I walked into the call center after we had opened it. They had designed it, all the brainiacs had designed the call center, walked in, and I said, well, where do people put their coats? And they all looked around and said, oh shit, we didn't put any coat closets here. And it's like, okay, brainiacs, here's your boy from Southern California. I'm the one who noticed that there were no coats, no place to put the coats. But it was a miserable experience. I understand why some people like it. The majority of people actually prefer that kind of an environment where the path is well trod and you're following processes and procedures that those who came before you figured out through painful experience that these are the right things to do. But it's where I learned once and for all, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a startup guy. That's my path. And I've been on it ever since. So I jumped over to a company that was just being formed. I knew a couple of the people that were forming it, a company called Cordiant Software out of Cupertino, California. And their software, our software, was designed to help call centers. We went out and won through some contacts that I had the contract with General Motors. It was when General Motors was first doing OnStar. And when OnStar first came out, you actually pushed the button in your car, and you were connected to a call center who could then guide you. Our software tied the telephone system in with the computer system in with a mapping system. So if you needed directions, it's not like Google. You have it on your phone now. But then there was an actual human being who was tracking you on the map and telling you, yep, make the next right, make the next left. Oh, you want to go to a restaurant. So all the stuff you depend on Google Maps for now, there was an actual human being doing that. And we had software that did all of that. So we went about, GM was our first big win. Then we went about selling to all the credit card companies, all the insurance companies. We raised about $3 or $4 million in our first couple of tranches. And built the software and then went to market with it. And I'm a big SaaS, software as a service guy. This was before there was such a thing as software as a service. We actually installed the software on their servers of the company and distributed it that way. And for our first couple of years, we had more services revenue than we had software revenue. We were selling licenses. The licenses were usually millions of dollars. $500,000 was a small deal. A couple $1 million was a big deal. And then the projects to get these things implemented were $1 million or $2 million. Then they had to buy $1 million or $2 million worth of gear to put all the software and everything on to run the thing. But it went well. I mean, we did not fit the normal stereotype of a software company because we were selling more services than licenses until we got about 3-4 years in. Then the software became much more reliable. And now that we didn't have to quite spend as much money to get the product deployed and make the customers happy. But along the way, we did an IPO, and we did our IPO in February of 2000. And for those of you who are old enough to remember the timeline at that time, that was a great time to go public. We went public at $14 a share. Within 6 weeks, we were at $56 a share, and we thought we had made it. Now, the interesting thing about this is, you're a founder, you go public, everything's great. You have your IPO, and you can't sell your shares. You can't do anything for at least 6 months. And even at that point, you have to plan it way in advance and do a whole bunch of reporting in order to sell your shares. Well, a funny thing happened in May of 2000. The whole market collapsed. So our shares went from 14 to 56 to 63 cents. And it took us 7 years to climb out of that hole. Eventually, we ended up selling the company for 110 million, which was less than we had actually raised through the IPO. And we did fine because we had a bunch of shares that were either $0 or practically at $0. and we did fine. It wasn't a big win, but it was a nice win. It was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears for a little bit of money, and putting a gold star on the resume of saying, hey, built a company, raised a bunch of money, people got their, we went IPO'd and people got their money back, and the company was bought out by a larger public company at the time. And there's still a product inside of that company today. If you Google Cordiant, you'll find them. I can't even remember the name of the company that bought us. It's been so long. But that was a win. And as we got toward the end, and it was pretty clear we weren't gonna make it. Well, we were gonna make it, but we weren't gonna make it the way we thought we were gonna make it. I ran across some other friends that I had met along the way at both Accenture and Cordiant, and they were starting this company that called Calidus, that calculated the commissions or the incentive compensation for really large sales forces. So think of like an insurance company where all the agents get paid on commission, or a mobile phone company where all the people who are selling you plans and phones and all the rest of that stuff get paid on a commission. Or Silicon Valley companies that were some of our biggest customers, these big manufacturers of gear, Cisco and NetApp, and these guys had probably the most complicated compensation plans that you've ever seen. Honestly, we would tell them, I don't know how your salespeople even know what they're incented to do, because the plans are so damn complicated. Thank God you need our software to figure it out. I don't know how you're supposedly incentivizing them. But, so at first that was a company that was not, that was a traditional software company. It was right on the border of when the cloud and the SaaS revolution started taking over in 2002 and 2003. They didn't even call it cloud then. They didn't call it software as a service, and they called it on demand. So my role there was the founder of the cloud division, or the cloud product offering, because the traditional software business was what they were doing. And we had all kind of realized that, all right, that's going to work for a few years, but that's not going to work for a long time. So we need to start a new company, and we called it Calidus Cloud. And the people in San Jose promptly said that, the engineering team said, no one's going to put compensation information and sales information on some servers that they don't own. Are you insane? They wouldn't help at all. So we had a support crew in Austin who was used to running the stuff with the customers. They were down for it. So we built the whole business in Austin, raised a bunch of money, and eventually went public. And it was a pretty rocky road at that time. We went public at 12 or 14. We saw the stock dip as low as $2 or $3, and then eventually climbed back out of the hole again. And we were kind of bouncing around. We were competing really well in this space against SAP, who had a product that competed with us. And eventually, SAP bought us for $2.4 billion. So that was a win. That was a nice win. It took quite a number of years to get there. At raising the capital. And, just like at Cordiant, the product didn't work when we first launched it. I mean, it worked okay, but there was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, not only to build the product to do what we wanted it to do, but to build it on the right platforms before we moved into the cloud. Are we on a Sun Solaris platform? Or are we on are we using Oracle for the back end, or MySQL, and all of these things that you don't even think about now in the age of the cloud, where none of that infrastructure is even of any concern to most of the companies that you do business with. But like Cordiant and like Accenture, before it, our customers were the big enterprise companies. We had a list of maybe 200 companies that were our customers, but they were the biggest companies in the world. And it's one of the reasons why that's what I like, as an investor and somebody who looks at companies. I tend to like software businesses that sell to these big enterprises, because you don't need as many customers. They're usually big customers. And if it works, it can work in a really big way. If it doesn't work, it can be pretty damn tough, because, if one or two of your customers go away, it's a bit more of a risky path. But the investment community tends to like it. So for us, we had a good run at Calidus. It was in the middle of when we were in the middle of Calidus when I decided to leave California and move to Nevada. It was pretty clear when I was getting into 2009 that I was the founder of the cloud company, and the cloud company had basically eaten the rest of the entire organization. So I was running worldwide sales, and I was on a plane every week going somewhere in the world to try to close deals with my sales team. And My daughter was off to medical school. My son was in the military. There was no reason for me to be in California. And I knew if I left and I was a Californian, I would get crushed on taxes. So I moved to Nevada thinking, all right, I'm gonna finish my play here. Then I'm gonna start my next company in Nevada. More, so we'll put a pin in that and I'll come back to it because clearly that didn't happen because I've, again, from some colleagues that I had met along the way at Calidus and Cordiant were wanting to do another startup, enterprise software startup. We called it Aptio. That doesn't mean anything. We wanted it to start with an A. We wanted it to be a short name. So there was a lot of brainstorming around what to call the company. So we ended up settling on Aptio. The URL was available. Didn't really connect necessarily with what we did. We were creating a product for CIOs who were constantly getting fired because when big companies have to cut back, one of the things they cut back on is IT spend because they view IT spend as it's just something we have to do. It's not really the core part of our business, no matter what big company you're talking about. You know, having to do IT work inside the company doesn't really contribute to the business. You just need to do it. So every time those companies came under budget pressure, they would push on the CIO to cut back the IT budget. And what's the biggest expense in IT? You'd think it's gear and no, it's people, just like every place else. So they would cut back on the people. Service would go to downhill, and all the other execs would complain, and the CIO would get fired. So we created product for the CIOs to take that business that they operated within their enterprises and make it into a services business. Oh, you provide PCs to people. Great. There's a business for that. Oh, you stand up email. Great. There's a business for that. You run products like Calidus and Cordiant. Great. There's a business associated with that. So when the rest of the organization came to the CIO and said, we need you to cut costs, they say, okay, what don't you want to buy? And it was very objective, sucked in all the data from all the cost centers, put it into nice service buckets for them. And they would just say, okay, Mr. or Ms. financial person or Mr. or Miss manufacturing person or salesperson or whatever part of the organization you're running, you want me to cut back my costs? Just buy less stuff from me and I'll cut back accordingly. And here's what you're spending. So you tell me what you wanted to eliminate. It was like the CIOs couldn't buy this stuff fast enough. I mean, they didn't have to ask, they had enough budget that they could do this. And this was finally a project for them. They were always doing projects for their other parts of their organization to stand up whatever it was that they want. You know, maybe the sales VP wanted Calidus to calculate incentive comp for their people. Maybe the call center people wanted Cordiant to do whatever they have to do inside the call center. But now finally the CIO had some gear, some software that could help them do their jobs. And it took off. It took off like crazy. By this time I had learned that I don't have to stay there for 7 or 8 years to achieve the benefits. So we stood the company up, spent a couple of years, not my funnest years in Seattle. Lovely town when the sun is shining, but the sun doesn't shine all that often in Seattle. But it was a great ride. We had some of the rock star Silicon Valley people on our board that had invested. So you guys like Ben Horowitz was on our board and got to hang with Ben at a few dinners and a few board meetings, et cetera. And now he lives in Vegas. So I'm hoping to maybe renew that acquaintance. It's been a while, as you can see by the calendar. It's been about 10 years since I hung out with Ben. And he does a lot of investments. I hope he remembers me. Maybe we'll find out sometime here in Vegas. But that was a nice win, and it didn't take too long. We raised about $70 million through about 6 rounds of funding, went public, and then we're taken back private by private equity. So the stock came out at like that in that same $12 to $14 range, ran up to about $40, and then private equity came in and took us over for about that price. So it was nice, you know, when you're there. If you didn't understand this, if you're there when you're the founders and you're there early, you don't get your stock for free, but you don't pay a lot for it. So it doesn't quite all roll to the bottom line, but it's a nice win. And it was one that felt good because I felt like, all right, finally, we weren't stumbling and bumbling around. Those early days were still hard because, again, like a lot of software, when you write the software and then you put it out into the world with your customers, they do things with it that you never imagined that they would do. And you have to figure out, is that them? Is it us? It's us. It's not them. They're your customers. They're going to do what they're going to do. Do as much testing as you can in advance, but still just be prepared to pivot and make things work when they don't want to work. And then from there moved to a company called SecureMate again. And then a couple of people that I had met along the way had this business that was in a regulated industry where if you are a big company and you're trying to do business in Brazil or the Middle East or some other place where how the community operates is a little different than how we operate here in the US. You can't bribe people, you can't depend on your family members to do certain things. That there's a lot of stuff that's not legal here that's not illegal in other places. And the software basically made sure that these big American and other companies that are listed on the American Stock Exchange were complying with the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, or the Anti-Bribery Act, as it's called in Europe. And if you did find out that your organization was not complying with those things, you would report yourself, because the fines are a lot lower if you report yourself than if somebody else turns you in. So we made sure that they were ticking all the boxes and following all the rules and saving these big companies money around foreign corrupt practices and things like that. And then the final story before I moved into StartUpNV was a company that was originally called Smart Picture. They still go by that name a bit. Now it's called Planner, and it's a computer vision product that you can take out your camera or a video, take a picture or a video, upload it to the software, and it will do all the measurements of anything in the software. So at first we thought it was going to be a do-it-yourself tool, and it largely has kind of gone down that path where if somebody like a closet guy, you want to have new closets put into your house rather than having somebody come out and measure it, or new blinds. You can just take your own pictures, upload it, and they give you an estimate without people having to come and go and schedule and all the rest of that stuff. So when we were first building this product that measured things, we got a lot of interest from like clothing manufacturers. We found out, interestingly enough, that people are not comfortable taking pictures of themselves in tight enough clothes or unclothed enough so that they can actually get an accurate measure of whatever part of their body it is they're going to clothe. And despite the fact that you promise to not share those pictures and keep them private and all the rest of that stuff, it just wasn't a thing that people were willing to do. When we launched this in Austin at South by Southwest. And if you've ever been to Austin and South by Southwest, there's these bus tours. There's a lot of drinking that goes on, and a lot of college kids from UT are riding these buses around, and every stop, they're serving beer, and then whoever is there that you're demonstrating your stuff. Probably should have seen this coming, but we had some interns that we were in a 16-story building. I was on like the 7th floor, and me and like 4 or 5 of our interns are in there, and we got people down in the lobby, and they're passing out like these things you could stick on things and measure stuff, and with your camera. And suddenly I'm in the room with the 2 interns who were both young women from UT, and I'm looking at the computer going, what is that? Oh my God, turn off the computers. I'll ask you this. What do young, drunk college men want to take pictures of and measure? And I'll just let your imagination go from there. So we had a whole passel of those pictures. And I was worried, am I going to get in trouble for like sexual harassment because I'm making these young women look at these pictures of things that they didn't ask to look at? And I'm not sure why these guys wanted to take pictures of that anyway. But anyway, it was a funny story. It taught us about what they're going to measure. The company is still going. Most of their business now is with insurance companies trying to do claims for, your fence blows over and you got to get an estimate, and the insurance companies are buying it and using this product as their own behind the scenes. No clothing, no other kinds of pictures, and there's a few new use cases out of it. So I was there as the original CEO of the company, because the guy who invented the technology that did this was super scientific, but didn't know how to run a business. And my buddy Bernie, all the way back from Car Search, had invested in this guy. And I was staying at Bernie's house in Austin while we were building SecureMate. And I was kind of bitching that I didn't really like my partners in SecureMate, and they were kind of squirrely and I didn't like them. And so he starts telling me he says, I just invested in this thing. Would you come in with me and help us build this company? And luckily, SecureMate actually got bought at about that time, not for a lot of money. Well, I'm not supposed to say exactly how much money, so I won't. But it was like a single. It was an okay win. But the people I worked with, I didn't really like and respect, so didn't stay at it for a really long time. But then, Planner turned into be something really interesting, and it's still going. We've seen the original money we raised at a $2 million valuation is now at a $25 million valuation, according to PitchBook. Doesn't mean anything. It's all on paper. But hopefully someday in the next few years, they'll eventually sell this thing and there'll be a check in the mail. And all of that led to StartUpNV. Back in 2009, when I moved to Nevada, it became clear to me that the main reason that I ended up doing some work with my friends at Apptio was because I couldn't get a company started here. I couldn't find capital. I couldn't find coders. There was nothing that I didn't. I mean, I was in the Bay Area working on these other companies, and I didn't know I was in something called a startup ecosystem. I was like a fish in water. I didn't know I was wet. It was just the way it was. So it took a couple of tries to try to figure out why can't I do the thing that I'm so used to doing in other places here? And it was like, okay, startup ecosystem's a thing. So after the experience at Planner, where we actually built that company inside of the Capital Factory, which is pretty much what I patterned StartUpNV after, was their program. And the reason I did that is because I came home thinking, all right, I got to find a version of Capital Factory at home to build my next company. And I can't believe I never knew about these things before. Came home, looked around. There's 1,800 of these things around the country, right? There's bound to be one. I lived in Reno. If there's not one in Reno, there's definitely one in Vegas, much bigger town, right? Wrong. Nothing existed. So my co-founders and I started StartUpNV in 2017 to solve that problem, to recreate the kind of environment that I had felt at Planner and the Capital Factory. We've been on that journey ever since. The first couple of years was mostly meant to help founders. We didn't have any capital. We connected some of our original founders with some capital, and they raised money, and none of it was ours. And it was a little frustrating. So a couple of years in, we applied for and won a federal grant from the EDA to help raise capital in Las Vegas specifically, but really throughout the state. And we couldn't take the federal money and invest it in companies, but what we could do is stand up programs that taught people how to raise capital, that taught investors how to invest capital. We could pay to have the costs of FundNV to set it up, the tens of thousands of dollars that it costs to set up a fund. We could pay for that. We just can't invest the actual federal money in companies. So we raised FundNV, and we've been off to the races ever since. We have a brief interruption there for COVID, where things were pretty slow, but it's back on track and going gangbusters right now. We're seeing lots of companies investing in probably about 5, 6, 7 companies a year from FundNV, and do expect that to kind of continue indefinitely. I also got involved in teaching at UNR, a course called Engineering 461, high-tech entrepreneurship taught at the university. And you got a little flavor of that with my opening remarks, which is what I say to the students at the end of the class there to inspire them to go out and live life as an entrepreneur. We started AngelNV, which has just got started for the 3rd year in a row, a couple of days ago. So we're in this year's version of that is probably going to invest well over $400,000 in startups, Nevada-based startups. So if you're an investor listening to this, welcome, and we hope to do a lot of good here and make some money over the course of the next few years by picking out some good companies to invest in this year. I got involved in the legislative process in 2021. Worked with then Lieutenant Governor Kate Marshall. We passed SB 9, which squared up our blue sky laws in Nevada with the rest of the nation's blue sky laws. This year, I know that the legislative session is getting started because I'm getting calls and emails from a number of the legislators that knew we wanted to work on some other stuff. So fingers crossed that we'll get a couple of cool new features in our state laws that'll make getting startups started and getting funding for startups easier and more clear cut in Nevada. Since our history never really had a lot of venture capital investments, the laws we have are a little bit antiquated, so we're going to try to fix some of those. We just started the 1864 raise about a month and a half, 2 months ago. We're going to continue to raise a $10 million fund. Probably, as these things go, it'll probably be summertime or maybe fall before we actually have enough capital committed to do the capital call and make our first investment. But we're hoping to make our first 2 investments in that larger fund, larger investments a little later this year. Some of that money will be going to companies that came through FundNV and AngelNV that required follow-on funding. Not all of it, but some of it will go there. But other parts of it will go to just brand new companies that we missed. They're bigger companies that we missed on the way up. Maybe companies like Accordion or a Calidus or an Apptio in their early days, or a Securemate or a Planner. And then Maggie and I became co-presidents of the Sierra Angels just in January. One of the oldest angel groups in the United States. It's formed in 1996, I think. About 30 families that make 4 or 5 investments a year, usually $1 million, $2 million in total between the investments that they make. So we're going to try to merge some of the activities of the Sierra Angels, 1864, AngelNV, FundNV, and all the work that we're doing here at StartUpNV together into a more cohesive and self-evolving ecosystem. I think you guys know Maggie and I are married. If you didn't know that, well, surprise, we're married. We've been married since 1985. We have 2 kids. Lauren, who now lives in Madrid, and Sean, who lives in Reno. So there's a lot of stuff in between these deals that happen. You know, when one deal closes, the next deal isn't quite ready. So there's consulting assignments and other things that are mixed into the mix here that aren't worth highlighting. There's interesting stories there. Maggie may have a couple of them. With hers, I'll tease it, but maybe she will, maybe she won't. But if she doesn't tell you any of those stories, then just ask me when you see me sometime. I'll tell you some of the stories about, I got my boss arrested. I have an FBI raid story in one of the businesses that I was consulting to. There's some interesting stuff that happens in sort of in between the cracks, so to speak. So I just, as you can tell, I love being an entrepreneur. I love supporting entrepreneurs. I think it's one of the greatest lives that you can live, not only for yourself, but for all the people that you help along the way. All of us who support the entrepreneurs through funding and coaching and all the rest of that stuff. It's just, like I said, and I think on top of all of that, for you and for it's a good thing for our community. We can create wealth in our communities this way, not only for ourselves and our family, but for the community at large. And it just breaks my heart every time the economy slows down. The state of Nevada and Vegas in particular gets punched in the solar plexus. It's like everything just stops. And I love all of the things that we've built in gaming and hospitality and mining and all the rest of the stuff we're really good at. Don't want to take a thing away from it. But man, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can do more. And that's my whole entrepreneurial journey has led it to this point where we're trying to do more, to try to build these ecosystems that I experienced in the Bay Area, that I experienced in Seattle and Austin. We're going to do our own version of this in Nevada because no place is the same as another place. But the basics still hold true. So thanks for coming out to hear me tell you my entrepreneurial journey today. If you think there's anything relevant that can help you, just ask, whether those are questions now or whether they're questions to me later in some other time that we're together. So please welcome Maggie back to the stage.
Hi, I don't know about a refrigerator. That sounds interesting. So you want to be an entrepreneur. So we'll cover the basic part. The characteristics of a successful entrepreneur are that you have a positive mental attitude and a creative mindset, and you're able to think fast, solve problems quickly, and move on. You also have to keep a lot of things in your head at the same time. Even if you're a technical founder, you should be responsible for the first 30 customers. You have to sell your product or service to them. You have to have your own motivation and drive. And it is like creating something out of nothing. And it's like raising a child. And when you're done, you can point to it and say, I made that. I had a lot of team members help me, but we made that and it didn't exist before. And it's a great sense of accomplishment. And there are going to be failures along the way. You have to be able to pick yourself up and move on. Come up with another way to deal with whatever is getting in your way. So flexibility, adaptability are just paramount. You need to have that. And then you also have to be able to trust others and work with others. So this is what almost anybody can find online about what it takes to be a successful entrepreneur. When you are starting a company, if you have a family, you're taking that family with you. They're on the same ride with you. They don't feel the pain as much as you do, but they feel it in different ways. So they're still on the ride with you, even though you think as an entrepreneur that you were creating this thing, and it's occupying at least 51% of your mind all the time, even when you're with your family. So it can be very chaotic. And I looked up to see if there were divorce rates for entrepreneurs, if it's any different from the general public, and there isn't a lot of information on that. The divorce rate for Americans right now is 2.3 per 100,000. So that's between 40 and 50%. And so what that means now is that you're actually slightly more likely to stay married than get divorced. In 2020, the divorce rate actually went down. So that's an interesting thing. I don't know how that really worked. You were spending a lot more time with your spouse, and was it like just too hard to consider leaving? Or did you actually have a new appreciation for that person you were sharing the house with? So, like I said, the divorce rate among entrepreneurs is not studied, but there's a very interesting book by this gal named Meg Hirschberg. She was married to the fellow who created Stonyfield Farms. They have yogurt and ice cream. It's from the East Coast, but you can find their products here. And so she's created a survival guide for entrepreneurs and their families. So exit. Exit has two different meanings here. We have the entrepreneurial exit, which is a great thing. And then we have the marriage exit, which is not so great. So if I can impart a little bit of strategy for you, if you're going into a new startup together, you should figure out what your goals are. What are you trying to create with this company? Are you motivated by an altruistic idea that your company will do good for mankind? Because with that kind of a goal, the whole family can get behind it, even though they know it's still going to be very difficult. And then what does success look like? When will you know that you have achieved success? If you start thinking about this and writing it down and talking about it before you get started, then you'll feel like you have little successes along the way, and you may recognize when you've achieved it. As much as it's a roller coaster ride and there's a lot of lows, there's a lot of successes too. So once you get done with that big presentation that you were so nervous about, take a breath, enjoy it, a couple hours anyway. You raise that first round of funds, and that takes an ungodly amount of work. You're prepping 24 hours a day for months on end. You do a road show, you meet with all these investors, you're rejected constantly. It's very, very draining. And so yes, once you get your funding, you can now make progress, but take a minute, take a day, and actually accept that you have had success, and then get back into entrepreneur mode and planning. And then what's important in your life? So yes, you're going to be a founder at least 51% of the time, but what is important in the family or in your health? You have to have a little bit of balance. And so going into this and having decided what's important, it's important that we're there for the kids' academic successes. It's important that I attend at least one soccer match in the season. Don't set your goals too high. It's important that we have Thanksgiving dinner every year, no matter what's going on. You make sure you're there. It's going to vary from one family to another, but you should have some absolutes so that you can feel successful in being the other roles that you are besides an entrepreneur. You're a healthy person. You're a good husband. You're a good father. Whatever it takes. You want to think about those things before you get sucked into the vortex that is a startup. So Jeff asked me to tell you a story, or he suggested that I would tell a story. So this was one of those in-between jobs, and he has taken jobs where he's consulting, or one time he took a job that was in our Southern California town because this job came up and it was in our Southern California town, and he'd been commuting. He is what is known as a road warrior, and that's somebody who leaves on Monday and is gone usually till Thursday night. They want to be home on Friday, and then they've got Saturday and Sunday to like refresh themselves. So he did this for years. So this opportunity came up. It was a call center. And so he took this job. It didn't pay as much as a Silicon Valley job would pay, but it was, in town. And then he calls me up on a Wednesday, the Wednesday before Thanksgiving one year. He's like, the FBI is here. We've been raided by the FBI and the ATF. He said, and all that stuff you see on TV, that's just how it happens. So then he came home, and of course, he didn't have a job anymore. So that hometown job didn't last very long. But he said they came in with hands on their guns. They were not out. With the flak jackets, they come in, they make everybody move away from the computers. And he, as a leader, was like hauled off into a separate room. They took the computers. All the people were like, what the hell's going on? You too? Well, yeah, who could know? So let me just tell you a little bit about what they were doing. They were packaging information that is free from the government if you know how to look. And so sometimes you'll see those late night ads where you can buy repossessed property from the government, and then they want you to sign up and you pay $20 and they send you this information. That information is available for free, but you don't know where to look for it. So when they had too many complaints about that, they were suspected of fraud, possibly even like the federal violations of sending stuff through the mail across state lines. So that's why they were raided. Did the company ever get back together?
They didn't make what they were doing.
Yeah, what they were doing was not illegal because they provided the packaged information to the recipient just as they promised.
Yeah.
But when they found out they could get it for free, they would complain.
Right.
So
Well, and to be clear, I was a consultant and I was there to help them set the call center up. I wasn't even actually sure exactly what they were doing, but when we find out,
that's a good line.
Yeah.
I don't know what they actually do. So, all right. The other things that I had to live with while we were going through these things is when he was in sales, quarter end is a push, right? The last 2 weeks of the month of the quarter, nothing happens. So our vacations were always planned for between the 4th and about the 8th week of the quarter. Not that we took a lot of vacations, but it had to be in that little lane right there. Parenting becomes really difficult because he was a road warrior. We stayed in Southern California, even though he was going to Austin or to the Bay Area. And so for that, he would try to come back and be the parent. And then when you're the sole parent for 4 days out of 7 every week, and somebody comes in and tries to say, oh yeah, you can do that. It's like, no, that doesn't work. So that is something that should be discussed beforehand too. And the sacrificing that it wasn't our sacrifice so much, the entrepreneur has such a burden because as they hire people, they're carrying the families of those employees on their shoulders. And when the money runs out, they're not going to tell their employees that that's a possibility, right? They're going to believe that they're going to get the next investment and that everything will be fine. But there are times when Jeff's had to lay people off, and it's just gut-wrenching. And so it takes a certain amount of understanding from the part of the other spouse to know that it's gut-wrenching for him or her, whatever. But the exits are fun, and you should also celebrate those a little bit until you get back to work, because in most cases, the founder or the co-founder, you're going to stay past the time when you get your investment, or as Jeff said, there's a SEC requirement that you cannot sell your shares for 6 months after your company goes public. So it's back to the grind. You're still working. And then at one point I came to realize that Jeff is a builder. Like when they started calling him a cowboy at Accenture up in Toronto, it's like, well, he's not really a cowboy. He just knows that it's better to make a decision and move on and see how it works and then adjust. That's the mindset of an entrepreneur versus a corporate person who's like, they want to get consensus before they make a decision. So it's no one person's fault if it doesn't work. So the entrepreneur is willing to take that on their shoulders and say, yes, I made that decision. Yes, it was wrong. And this is what we did. to work around it and make progress. So it's a great life. It takes a certain amount of patience, and you have to really understand that the person that you're with is a builder and that they're going to do this again. And it can be very rewarding, but it's still a roller coaster ride. So let me talk a little bit about Founder University. There's one topic per month. So depending on how dense that topic is, there could be 5 sessions or there could be 2. And so we're going to keep you into the loop with emails. We'll be sending out the recordings within 2 days and let you know what the next topic is going to be. And you can also check it out on our website. So we do have that information on the website. And we'll finish on December 14th of this year. Yeah, go ahead. Yes, so we will send. Okay, I can't promise that everybody's slides will be available, but we will send out the link to the recording. And if the speaker allows us to, we will share the slides as well. Okay, so thanks for
Yeah.
coming, everybody.
Thanks for coming.